Move your career further, faster in just 2 days with a Harvard Professional and Executive Development Program. Advance your leadership skills, craft smarter business strategies, build your network, and transform how you work and think to keep your career moving forward. You'll earn a certificate and can add Harvard to your resume with Harvard Professional and Executive Development. Learn more at professional.dce.harvard.edu/Spotify.
My dad works in B2B marketing. He came by my school for career day and said he was a big ROAS man. Then he told everyone how much he loved calculating his return on ad spend. My friends still laugh at me to this day.
Not everyone gets B2B, but with LinkedIn, you'll be able to reach people who do. Get a $100 credit on your next ad campaign. Go to linkedin.com/campaign to claim your credit. That's linkedin.com/campaign. Terms and conditions apply. LinkedIn, the place to be, to be.
Hey, I'm Ryan Reynolds. Recently, I asked Mint Mobile's legal team if big wireless companies are allowed to raise prices due to inflation. They said yes. And then when I asked if raising prices technically violates those onerous 2-year contracts, they said, "What the f*** are you talking about, you insane Hollywood ass?" So to recap, we're cutting the price of Mint Unlimited from $30 a month to just $15 a month. Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
$45 upfront payment equivalent to $15 per month. New customers on first 3-month plan only. Taxes and fees extra. Speed slower above 40 gigabytes. See details.
The remainder of Feyre's stay at the Night Court has her learning to read and shield, and growing increasingly reclusive from those who want to be her friends. Her return to the Spring Court heralds a new wave of overprotectiveness from Tamlin, who does all he can to lay claim to Feyre and her body. The tithe shows Feyre a new level of brutality among the high fae of the Spring Court, and an alarming increase in Tamlin's capacity for anger when things do not go his way.
The views expressed by the hosts are entirely their own and in no way represent the thoughts or intentions of the original author. This podcast is a discussion shared to spark thought and conversation on the characters and themes of this novel.
Though the hosts speak mostly within the constraints of this book, series spoilers may be discussed with or without warning. Explicit language, as well as themes of sex, violence, abuse, self-harm, and depression will recur throughout this podcast. Listener discretion is advised.
Welcome to Book Talk for Book Talk, a podcast where we deep dive into the writing of your favorite novels.
This season, we are exploring Sarah J. Maas's most beloved novel in the Court of Thorns and Roses series.
This is Jac.
And I'm Amy.
This week we're discussing chapters 7 through 11 in A Court of Mist and Fury.
This week we ask ourselves, is this the end of Tamlin and Feyre's love story? And the beginning of Rhysand and Feyre?
Some themes we're going to see this episode are endings and beginnings, as well as the power that's acknowledged and power that's ignored.
As we mentioned in our previous episode, Feyre's pride is an interesting beast that we have to tackle as we explore Mist and Fury. Remember in the wedding, Feyre was unwilling to call out for help, even though she desperately wanted it. As we enter chapter 7, Feyre is very willing and able to beg for her sisters. Remember what she's already shown us, that when it comes to survival, she will do anything, and that includes ensuring the survival and safety of her sisters. This shows her continued devotion to them, and sets up how devastating it will be for her when they are captured. Quote, "Don't invade," I breathed. "I'd get on my knees for this. I'd crawl if I have to. Don't invade, please." Another interpretation of this quote, this is how Tamlin has acted every time Feyre has been in danger. She now has adopted his approach because he has made her weak, just like him. Hence, Feyre's unwillingness to fight when Rhysand suggests it. Because what happened last time she fought? She died.
Yeah, that's unfortunate for her. For her to have
so unfortunate
for her to have died like that. That's not great. Not great for her. So just a few pages ago, when Feyre arrives at the Night Court, she's ready to beg him to not take her under the mountain, and now she's talking about begging again. We remembered from Thorns and Roses that Feyre isn't a big fan of begging, especially when Tamlin begged Rhysand. So now she's reduced to begging twice in a short amount of time. Not her favorite moment.
Definitely not.
That's, she's a
proud being.
It's funny that she's a proud being, and then she ends up being with someone who has tattoos on his knees to remind him not to, be on his knees.
Yeah,
it's just, pretty matching.
Yeah,
anyway.
that's true.
We also see a different side of Rhys here. He ends up growling and yells at her. Quote, the raw command in his voice, the voice of the High Lord of the Night Court, had me acting on instinct. I mean, he's not too different from Tamlin here, throwing out that whole High Lord pulling rank business.
You know, that's just how I pull rank with my dog, too. You know, I also wonder the raw command and having her act on instinct, how much of that is the mating bond? In a lot of other mating bond related things, the alpha dominates the omega through commands, and the omega can't help but obey.
Yeah, but aren't they supposed to be equals?
Yeah, that's fair.
I don't know, but it's still hot. Why is everything hot to me? This entire episode, fair warning, guys, I have a problem.
Are you okay?
That's the real question we're going to be asking in this episode today. Is Jac okay?
Feyre's weakness extends to a weak stomach. Quote, without that wall, if Hybern was indeed to launch an assault on the human world, I wished I hadn't eaten such a large breakfast. Remember, we saw vomiting as a sign of weakness in Thorns and Roses. It is a sign of Feyre giving over her power. When she vomits at the Spring Court night after night, she is giving her power away to her guilt and to Tamlin. Here, she continues to do the same.
God, I love this point.
Thanks.
You're bringing it this episode, I'm not going to lie.
Thanks. Power in Prythian is also an important subject of conversation in this chapter. As Rhys points out, quote, we now have several untested High Lords, broken courts with High Priestesses angling for control like wolves around a carcass, and a people who have realized how powerless they might truly be. The High Priestesses are wolves, where Feyre is like her simple mare from earlier chapters, or a doe. Yet Ianthe proved to not be a wolf at the wedding. Feyre will become the wolf at the Weaver's Cottage and in Velaris.
It's funny because at the wedding, Ianthe's telling, or not the wedding, but at one of the parties, Ianthe's telling Feyre, we're just amongst all these wolves. And then here's Rhysand now pointing out like, nah, High Priestess, she's the wolf.
Yeah, she is the wolf in sheep's clothing is what she is.
So Rhysand says priestesses, as if there are several priestesses out there who are like Ianthe. And we can guess at this point he's talking about Ianthe too. But we never really hear back on all of these other priestesses who want control. Is it a plot hole? Or, Amy, I thought you said you had an idea.
So I definitely have a thought about this, and this might be a little bit of a spoiler, so forewarning.
For Silver Flames?
After Silver Flames. So it's a little bit related to Silver Flames.
Okay.
So by the end of Silver Flames, some of the mortal queens are still alive, correct? I wonder if the mortal queens are going to be mirrored by the High Priestesses in Prythian during Vass's story or whatever we get next when the mortal queens are confronted.
Oh, so like mortal queens represent High Priestess.
Or like we're going to see two sides of it. The same way that we see mirrors in these courts, we might see mirrors in the mortal world versus Prythian.
I like that.
Maybe. Who knows?
I'm on board.
On the same page, Feyre thinks, quote, and Ianthe, she might be ambitious, but she was Tamlin's friend. My friend of sorts. Perhaps the only ally we'd have against the other High Priestesses. Rhys's personal dislike of her or no. I'm sorry, but is Feyre only coming to Ianthe's defense right now because Rhysand doesn't like her? Feyre rationalizes who Ianthe is rather than seeing her for what she is.
It's pretty loyal of Feyre, even if she doesn't like her.
For the wrong reason.
I know, but, she's a ride or die. You present a good question here, and I have no answer. In fact, I'm not even going to say anything about that. I'm going to bring an entirely different point. Feyre keeps calling Lucien her friend. She can't stop calling him her friend, but in this quote that you bring, I love that Feyre isn't even willing to call Ianthe her friend. She's just a friend of sorts. It's cold, but I love it.
But I actually think you make a good parallel there or comparison. Feyre is inclined to call people her friends that aren't really her friends. So, of course, if she hates Ianthe,
then she really doesn't like her.
Yeah, she must not.
She's willing to call anyone her friend. Yeah, that's funny.
Going back to our notes. While all of this is setting the stage for the politics that play a role in the story of Mist and Fury, it is also an important tool to establish Feyre's feelings of weakness. The world of Prythian is much wider and vast than she or the reader have imagined up until this point. It is an intimidating world. So when Rhys later suggests that she become a weapon and that she play a role in this new world, Feyre doubts herself. And we naturally also doubt Feyre, because how could she be a weapon when she denies or ignores her powers?
Here's another question to think about. Rhys wants Feyre to be a weapon, to embrace this new side. But by asking her to be a weapon, he's asking Feyre to be a tool. It's like him asking her to be a thing rather than a person.
You know what that sounds like?
A Tamlin.
A Tamlin. He wants her to be possession for him to wield.
Yeah.
Not great.
Not great.
I mean, unless he views himself as a weapon, right?
Like Rhysand views himself as a weapon?
Does he view himself as a weapon?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
So, I mean, in that way,
he's like, join me.
Yeah, join me.
Join me on the side of the weapons.
Yeah, kind of. Cassian's a weapon, Moore's a weapon,
Amarin's totally a weapon. Amarin is the like last ditch, we're all dying.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So on some level, he views all Fae as weapons?
Just the ones he cares about.
Yeah. Okay. In this chapter, we also begin to see an interesting compare and contrast between Rhysand and Tamlin and how they use information as power over Feyre, as well as how they treat her in general. Unlike Tamlin, Rhysand does not forget Feyre's identity or value as a huntress. Quote, rumor has it you caught a Sorial. I've tried and failed. Twice. But that's a discussion for another day. I saw you trap the Middengard worm like a rabbit. Yet Rhys refuses to tell Feyre why he needs these skills of hers. And so to some extent, does he not view her as a tool the same way that Tamlin views Feyre as a possession?
Yeah, we came right back to this. You're right. He does view her like a tool.
Yeah.
Completely. So we also have Rhysand using information about him as a power to lure her. Quote, I have no interest in ever seeing full-scale slaughter like that again. Rhys has control of the situation here. He's giving Feyre nuggets of information, appearing to want to be vulnerable, but in actuality, he's giving her nuggets of information and expecting to build trust, but only little bits at a time.
By giving Feyre some information, Rhysand pushes Feyre to question the status quo, instead of allowing her to continue to accept Tamlin as the authority over her life. Quote, he doesn't inform me of those things. Perhaps it's time he did. Perhaps it's time you insisted. The irony here is Rhysand withholds information when Feyre asks because it's not the right timing.
What is this? What's this double standard that he's doing here? It's adorable. I can only choose it's adorable. I have to say that or I'll be really mad at him. No, I'm really mad at him. That's
Rhys, baby, I love you, but you suck
God,
sometimes.
Just don't you hear your own hypocrisy here? So remember in book 1, Amy, you discussed that Tamlin demonstrates how Feyre should listen so that she could pick up clues about the curse. I think this is Rhysand doing the same thing. He's telling her, quote, perhaps it's time you insist. He's showing Feyre what he would expect from her. Rhysand also makes Feyre the go-between, having her be the one to relay information between Rhysand and Tamlin. Rhysand wants her to do this, and it feels like this is two grown-ass men incapable of a conversation. You want to know why? Because they're Fae males. And what are they? Fails. Be decent. Be a grown-up. They're over 5, Rhysand's 500 years old. Tamlin's 400? Come on.
Yeah. Where are their cojones?
There are none.
There are none here.
Cojones are only for women at this point.
I was going to say, do females have cojones?
Balls?
Yeah.
They have balls.
I'm just kidding.
I mean, I'm pretty sure Nesta talks about them.
Oh, does she? I don't remember. One thing Rhysand does get credit for is that he does combat the notion that Feyre is Tamlin's possession. Quote, you are no one's subject. You can be a pawn, be someone's reward, and spend the rest of your immortal life bowing and scraping and pretending you're less than him, than Ianthe, than any of us. But I know you, more than you realize, I think, and I don't believe for one damn minute that you're remotely fine with being a pretty trophy for someone who sat on his ass for nearly 50 years and then sat on his ass while you were shredded apart.
Ooh.
I do love this.
I mean, it's the only time that we've seen right now of Rhysand that he's really being honest and not hiding behind his words.
Right, and his true feelings about Tamlin, but in general, are coming through.
Oh, completely.
I do find it funny here that Rhysand does hint at the bond or the mating bond and how much he's learned about Feyre, which I think reinforces my theory from episode 2 that he's taking advantage of the bond and the information it gives Rhysand about Feyre. This parallels Tamlin in book 1 and how he was always gleaning more information from Feyre than he was giving to Feyre about himself.
As much as I love this passage, there's a part of it that doesn't sit right with me. On one side, I love feminist Rhysand with my whole heart. I love that he's trying to empower Feyre and remind her of her own strengths. What's hard to process is the part where he says, quote, "I know you more than you realize, I think." Well, no shit. Like, Feyre doesn't even know that they're mates. She doesn't know how much he can hear her thoughts when they're nowhere near each other. And this is all coming back to knowledge is power. Rhysand has knowledge over Feyre. He has knowledge of her inner workings. He has knowledge about their actual dynamic. And when you think about it, Feyre and Rhysand, when they were under the mountain, they were equals. They were both prisoners. Now, Rhysand is the one who holds more knowledge. He holds more power over her, and they're starting off their dynamic on uneven footing.
You know, that's an interesting point that you bring up. They had built some camaraderie while under the mountain.
Mm-hmm.
And that camaraderie is mostly gone, and it's because there are power dynamics that weren't at play before.
And now you're going to have that power dynamics automatically when you have one party who knows it all.
Yeah.
Like, quite literally. And then the other party who is just begging for someone to tell her one piece of information.
Yep. There is one major difference between Tamlin and Rhysand that is reflected here, and that is the types of rooms in which they keep Feyre. So if you recall, the rooms in the spring court that Feyre keeps are dark and enclosed. In contrast, the rooms in the Moonstone Palace are open and airy. As we've talked about before, the environment in which Feyre is in either can reflect her psyche or, I think, can also reflect those around her. Here, the rooms are symbolic of Rhysand and Tamlin and the level of comfort they have with sharing information with her. The increased airflow in the Night Court rooms or in the Moon Palace rooms kind of are symbolic of Rhys's ability to share information with her, at least more so than Tamlin. Those are my thoughts.
I mean, pretty good thoughts. I see what you're saying. It's like clearing the air.
Right.
You know, like in her stuffy room with Tamlin, there's so much that's unsaid. But at least with Rhysand, even though she may not be getting full truths, there's more of a breeze coming in there. And we love breezes.
We do love breezes. SJM loves her breezes.
Ugh.
You know what, though? I don't see the practicality of these rooms at all because it's on top of the Night Court, right?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
None of the Night Court High Lords up until this point that we know of have had wings. So why is it so airy? It's just too convenient for SJM in my mind. There's no practical reason for this other than to show off their power.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
It's bothered me since the beginning.
That's fair.
I've just held it in.
They just drop and roll, tuck and roll. and then they land a perfect 10 and they say nailed it and then move on to be High Lords.
How Rhysand and Tamlin treat Feyre when she wears something that is pleasing to them is also a fascinating thing to observe. As we noted before, Feyre admits that she doesn't mind her daily Night Court attire because it is both easy to move in and feminine, a good balance of her many sides. In contrast, she hates the dresses that are her uniform at the Spring Court because she's always disliked dresses. They are hard to move in if she needs to run or escape. Tamlin, in Thorns and Roses, has only told Feyre she is beautiful when she wears dresses. Here, Rhysand doesn't tell her she's beautiful because of what she's wearing, but that what Feyre is wearing suits her. I think that's an important difference.
It is an important difference. The difference between you're beautiful and it suits you is the placing of ownership. You're beautiful is a judgment that's given. Tamlin's owning Feyre's worth of beauty by deeming it to her, versus Rhysand is telling her it suits you. So he's giving ownership back to Feyre. It fits her. It's not his ideals for her.
Which I appreciate, Rhysand.
I do. Anything with like comfy, billowy pants I'm on board with.
Yeah. And you want to tell me I'm sexy in my pajama pants? Go for it.
Like she really is just going around in pajama bottoms like, right. Hey, fellas.
I'm yours for the taking. Despite no one to hold her accountable, Feyre decides to commit herself to her daily reading and shielding lessons.
I do not have that self-discipline. Every day?
I don't either.
Every day? With a bathtub like that.
Oh, why?
I'd be there.
I would read and shield in the bathtub, maybe.
Yeah, that's fair.
My books would be ruined.
Yeah, that's also fair.
Feyre claims it is only because it was all I had to do. But is this true? If we think back to Thorns and Roses, Feyre was never taught anything before. She was only self-taught, especially when you think about her hunting. Therefore, Feyre recognizes the value in being able to learn something and the importance of the lessons that Rhysand is giving her. And that, quite frankly, she just can't say no. Also, Feyre's a goody two-shoes, so it's really on brand.
Mm-hmm.
By reading and shielding, is Feyre reclaiming some of herself by choosing to educate herself instead of allowing herself to believe, as Tamlin has taught her, that there is power in ignorance?
This feels like such an obvious lie that Feyre is telling herself, and I wonder how many readers catch it. Feyre says she has nothing better to do, and therefore she did the reading and writing lessons with Rhysand because that was all that was going on for her. Her lies to herself are becoming more and more obvious. It's becoming obvious to the readers, and I think it's becoming more obvious to Feyre. Feyre could have easily done a lot of other things. She could have taken a bath, napped in the bath. Not recommended. That's dangerous. But instead, she decides to do the lessons.
You're so right. And just as I've been saying nonstop, she's unreliable.
Damn it, Feyre. Just be reliable for once.
Similar to the reading and shielding, Feyre could have chosen to not consume food when Rhys wasn't around. When Feyre first arrives, Rhysand is very attentive to her need to eat and makes sure she eats enough. As the week progresses, though, she takes to eating in her rooms, which, like the lessons, Feyre could have just chosen to not eat, but she obviously does. Is this a sign of trust on her part, or on Rhys's? Or, like the lessons, is this a sign of Feyre reclaiming her power in whatever way she can?
The fact that Feyre is eating in her rooms is such a great point that you're making here. So just as Tamlin keeps his own rooms private, Feyre is hiding her slow growth of power, keeping it to herself.
Yes, I totally agree. Feyre has been taught she can't have power, and so she has to keep it hidden until she can trust people to be okay with her having power. At a midpoint in the week, Feyre encounters Mor and Rhysand in the middle of a conversation about an attack on Césaire. Rhys is uncharacteristically vicious to Az and Mor compared to later chapters. I thought a lot about why this is. Is Rhys on edge because of Feyre's state of malnutrition? Does she soften him the more they're around each other? If we look at it from the perspective of power, it can come across as Rhys being short with his close reports because he does not have control over Feyre and her health or well-being. Only once Feyre is in his care permanently does he begin to soften. Does, then, Rhysand's anger stem from a lack of control over Feyre or control over Tamlin?
Oh, yeah. We have to remember, though, Rhys has an inherent anger about him at all times, if you really think about it. In this case, he's angry that he couldn't help those who were killed. It's a constant reminder that he feels like he's failing, which he always feels like he's failing. Eventually, Feyre grounds him, but he still has that anger. When we reflect on the whole book, Rhysand is a very angry character.
You do bring up a great point. If I think about the events after the summer court visit, Rhys is really hard on himself, and in that way, he and Feyre are very alike.
Mm-hmm.
They're very prone to, I don't know if hating themselves is the right word, but kind of.
They're really prone to just being really hard on themselves and feeling like they're not doing enough.
Yeah.
And the weight is on both of their shoulders because, even though Feyre didn't have an entire court, she did grow up having to take care of her family. So The weight was on her shoulders. It's kind of the same reason that Feyre and Tamlin connected initially, right? She felt like she understood the weight of having to take care of people just like Tamlin did. The difference is, while Tamlin is busy resenting it, Feyre and Rhysand both walked into this fate knowing that this is their fate.
And being okay with taking on responsibility.
Yeah. It stresses them out, it hurts them, but they're ultimately okay with that.
Good point.
Good point to you.
Thanks. Let's take a beat to let me comment on the fact that Feyre really has a thing for Rhys's wings. When he gets angry and reveals them, she describes them as great, beautiful, brutal. This is very reminiscent of her description of the shadow of his wings in Thorns and Roses. Like Feyre, they are described in contrasts. No wonder they're her kink.
I mean, wingspan.
Wingspan, baby. Toward the end of this scene, after Mor has left, Feyre's interaction with Rhysand implies that she resents him. But when he walks off the edge of the veranda, quote, "My heart stopped dead, but before I could cry out, he swept past." Here, we see a character free fall for the first time. Free falling, especially Feyre and or Rhysand free falling, recurs throughout the novel. In this instance, Rhysand is alone as Feyre watches on. I think this is symbolic of one of two possible things. A. It's where they are at in their relationship with one another. From the beginning, Rhysand is committed to Feyre, demonstrated by his comfort with falling off the edge of the veranda before his wings catch him. Feyre, on the other hand, will have varying levels of comfort with free-falling as the novel progresses. B. Their individual understanding of what they want for their future is represented in this freefall. Rhys has a very clear devotion to his court. Feyre, on the other hand, doesn't know yet what eternity will bring for her or what she even wants out of it. One difference that I have to highlight, Rhys has wings and Feyre doesn't. At least not yet. Spoiler. I haven't decided what that means.
I got a thought.
Oh, okay. Okay.
I didn't tell you this thought when we were
No,
prepping.
you didn't.
I'm secret
excited.
thoughts. Okay, so Rhys is capable of free falling because he knows he's going to catch himself because he has wings. Feyre doesn't have that yet, and so she's not able to just throw herself into life the same way Rhysand is.
She doesn't yet have the tools to catch herself.
Exactly.
Love it.
That's the link.
Good job.
And then if you think about it, we're going into Wing and Ruin here, but when Feyre finally gets wings, that's really when she has the tools for herself, right? Mm-hmm. She's been training with Cassian. She brought down the spring court, essentially. Mm-hmm. So when she upgrades to wings, she's, evolved. She has evolved. Full Charizard.
Right now, she's just Charmeleon.
She's just Charmander?
No, Charmander was the first one, so that would be Thorns and Roses.
Yeah.
Charmeleon is the evolution in between, which is her. She's trying to find her Charmeleon right now.
Yeah, she is. She's just a girl out there trying to find her inner Charmeleon. When one day you'll bloom and be a Charizard.
She's not there yet.
The morning of Feyre's return to the spring court arrives, and the first thing she says to Rhysand is that it's been a week and it's time to take her home. Rhys responds, I want you to talk to me like a person. Start with good morning. Let's see where it gets us. Again, Rhysand is talking to Feyre like a child, the way that a parent would when they're teaching their kid good manners. In addition, Rhysand does not say goodbye when he leaves the night before. He jumps off a ledge. Like he would rather throw himself off of a cliff before saying goodbye to Feyre. And yet she comes in and he's expecting her to be all prim and proper.
You know what this sounds like?
Tamlin.
Tamlin. He's so dramatic.
You didn't come and say good morning to me, Feyre.
Let me throw myself off a ledge. Before Rhysand takes Feyre to the spring court, he is brutally honest with her and calls Feyre out on her bullshit. This is a level of honesty Feyre has been denied at the spring court. What's fascinating about this moment is that Feyre accuses Mor of not visiting her. Rhysand calls Feyre out for not even asking, since Mor was waiting for an invitation. What this implies to me is that Feyre is perpetuating her own beliefs of being without power, and maybe without accountability. Rhys makes it a point to clarify that Feyre had the power to invite Mor, but Feyre chose not to, and that by choosing not to is what is making her miserable and alone.
Ooh. So I'm going to look at this a little differently. Rhys assumes that Feyre knows to call Mor, a complete stranger, a stranger that Feyre had previously heard had, quote, better things to do. Feyre knows that Mor is a busy fae. Also, who's going to call on a complete stranger to come visit and hang out? Their interaction was a second.
I'm not going to do it.
No, thank you. This is another moment of people not being communicative to Feyre. How's Feyre supposed to know that Mor's giving her space? Again, she's a complete stranger. It's thank you for giving me space and understanding me on a deeper level, person who I've never met before. Before Feyre leaves, Rhys pleads to her one more time, saying that he's not her enemy. She says that he's Tamlin's enemy, and therefore her enemy. Does it? Rhysand asks. Feyre says, free me from my bargain, and let's find out. Rhysand is asking for her trust, when trust takes time to build. He isn't even there for most of the week, which, again, similar to Tamlin, who just leaves her alone all the time, so he doesn't even take advantage of the time to build her trust. I understand that Rhysand is trying to give her space, and while the intentions are good, Rhysand is once again angry that good intentions have consequences.
What Sarah J. Maas is teaching us is that good intentions don't mean shit.
You have an action, there's always going to be a reaction.
Right, exactly. And you could have a good intention, but your choices can lead to bad consequences.
Yeah, even if you're right, it doesn't matter. Consequences are consequences. Yeah. You have to own that.
What's the example you used while we were prepping?
Oh, if you put a child to bed early and the kid's mad at you and grumpy at you, well, oh well.
Right.
I'm doing what's best for you.
Right. You can't be their friend.
Oh, no. I compared Feyre to a child again.
Oh no, we're just perpetuating the problem.
No. I'm so sorry, Feyre.
Feyre thinks of the spring court as home upon her return. How she chooses to define home throughout the novel is going to evolve. Though she wants to view the spring court as home in this moment, I don't think that it actually is for her. Because upon her return, instead of being loved the way she wants to be loved, Tamlin denies Feyre the comforts she wants and interrogates her about the night court. Tamlin here is choosing his duty over his relationship with Feyre. He is taking advantage of the information she has. Granted, it's not unlike Rhys, who uses their bond for information about her.
Feyre's also not allowing the spring court to be a place of comfort. When she arrives, Tamlin inspects her, and she tells him that no one's touched her. On the second time of telling him that no one's touched her, she, quote, tears out of his grip and is pretty short with him. Look, Tamlin's allowed to be concerned here. All he knows is what could have happened, which probably in his mind was what happened underneath the mountain originally, which is Rhysand making Feyre dress half naked, dancing in front of him all night long. Tamlin is allowed to make the worst assumptions because he only knows Rhysand as being the person who would take advantage of her body.
Right. I mean, Rhys could have violated her body for all Tamlin knows, and that's probably what he's been imagining for the past week.
Yeah, like Tamlin gets to be freaked out by this. But what we're seeing here is that Feyre is punishing Tamlin for even letting her go to begin with.
I do have to say, I see both sides of this. Feyre has told him she's fine. Why can't he just trust her?
Yeah, but like, I think you're allowed. Okay, so it's kind of like when I call you, right? Mm-hmm. Or my mom. I feel like I'm allowed to call at least 5 times in a row before it's weird if you don't pick up.
Oh, no, that's fair.
I reserve the right to call. And then around the 5th time, then it's like, okay, fine, they're not answering. Like, I think there's a certain amount of he's allowed to ask.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
mm-hmm.
There's a leniency here.
Yeah.
Her telling him she's fine the first go, it's okay that that's not enough.
Fair.
Especially since he might think that she's been mind controlled.
Also fair. Going back to this idea of home, instead of the Spring Court Manor being a place of refuge, the manor has been trashed by Tamlin in Feyre's absence. He also doesn't trust her when she says she's fine, which probably annoys her. And Tamlin makes empty threats about not letting Feyre go next time when they both know he can't act on that. Feyre tries to explain this away by her endless capacity for empathy. Quote, "What nightmares had he suffered, waking in his sleep while I was away? What had it been like to imagine me in the enemy's hands after seeing what Amarantha had done to me?" "I know," I murmured at last. "I know, Tamlin." Or I was trying to know. Okay, but did he have those nightmares when you were under the mountain? Because he didn't do anything then.
He took Benadryl every single night and slept very soundly.
He took some CBD.
Amarantha had her own cannabis thing down there. Made sure everyone was sleeping well.
In this way, she looked out for everybody.
She just wanted to make sure everyone was well rested for when she tortures them.
When Feyre calls Tamlin out on making her a spy and interrogating her, she gives in to Tamlin's demands so that he cannot accuse Rhysand of scrambling her mind. No, Feyre might not be a spy now, but she will be by the end of the novel. Feyre is unwilling to accept that giving Tamlin details makes her feel horrible and blames Rhysand anyway. Quote, "And maybe he had scrambled my mind, even with the lessons in shielding, because describing the layout of his home, his court, the mountains around them, felt like bathing in oil and mud. He was my enemy. He was holding me to a bargain I'd made from pure desperation." I am not going to stop saying this. This is just a reminder that Feyre is unreliable as a narrator and is not always willing to be honest with herself or the reader.
I got a question here.
Sure.
When I read this passage, every single time I read it differently. Is Feyre feeling like she's bathing in oil and mud a place of guilt? Or potentially did Rhysand put a little bit of magic there and, she can't actually remember? I go back and forth every single time. What's your interpretation?
So I've read it the same every time, and to me it's always come across as feelings of guilt, and at the end of the day, she does inherently have a little bit more trust for Rhysand than she does for Tamlin because of their shared camaraderie under the mountain.
Yeah, but I also can see Rhysand putting safety measures.
I don't think so, because she's not keeping anything safe. The only thing that makes her think that her mind is scrambled is because she feels guilty telling the details.
You're right. So, there's nothing really that she's seen that would make it concerning.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, Rhysand specifically allows her to have information. She's able to tell Tamlin about Césaire.
Yeah, or even just like the map that was empty.
Right, exactly. And really, if Rhysand wanted Feyre to keep things secret, he has the means. He's done it with Valaris. His ancestors have done it with Valaris. So it's not impossible. And I think Feyre just feels guilty.
That's fair. That's fair. That's Feyre. Have I not made that joke yet?
I don't know.
So if we remember, Feyre's been asking Tamlin to be part of his overall planning, right? He's sneaking off. She knows that there's something going on, and she wants to be involved in what he's doing and that threat. So here's a moment for her to be a part of it, to tell Tamlin and everyone what was happening at the night court, and she's rejecting that. Granted, it's because Rhys is a good fae, and that's her gut instinct, even if she won't recognize it yet. But this is a moment when Feyre could reject that part and lean into what she's been asking for. I get it. Strategy and politics and all that, it's messy. And Feyre isn't willing to play. Instead, Feyre is leaning on her old ways and then starts asking Tamlin to go upstairs and have sex.
Because, she's got issues. But that's actually a really interesting point. What does it take for Feyre of now, who's unwilling to do the political stuff, be very willing to fool Tamlin later on? Yeah,
she goes from, I want to be political, and then, no, I don't want to do it, to, like, I will bring your entire... I'm going to light this bitch on fire.
From the inside. No, it's actually really fascinating, and I can't wait to talk about it as we get deeper into this novel. Up until this point, we've seen repeatedly how Tamlin has treated Feyre like a possession. In this chapter, we see Feyre call Tamlin my high lord, which also implies some form of ownership as a subject. I don't think that this is a romantic ownership on Feyre's part, but accountability to a superior. Quote, he was the shield and defender of his people, of me. Rather, in this moment, Tamlin owns Feyre as a subject, as an object of his protection. This is why Rhys's words, quote, you are no one's subject, resonate so much with her, because she has never been one to be owned before, and Feyre has to convince herself and or rationalize why bowing to Tamlin in this moment is okay.
By Feyre allowing herself to be Tamlin's subject, she's giving ownership to him and giving up the idea that the Spring Court is her home, because it's actually Tamlin's home. You can't have a home without some type of emotional ownership to it, and Feyre doesn't have that emotional ownership there.
At least if not ownership, shared ownership, right?
Yeah, some joint custody of sorts.
Yeah, a joint custody of home. She doesn't have any claim to that.
No, so that's why she just kind of leans back and is like, my high lord, that's his place, his home. I'm just living in it.
Just like my apartment. I pay the rent, but my animals own it.
Yeah, that's true. Your cat does.
When Feyre returns to the Spring Court and is brave enough to bring up training, because she's begun training with Rhysand, Tamlin shuts Feyre down, saying she doesn't need to because Tamlin can guard her. Feyre suggests she can make a difference in the coming war, but Tamlin shuts her down again, suggesting he doesn't think either Feyre can make a difference or that Tamlin would rather risk the worst case scenario than let Feyre be another sacrifice. What this is doing is minimizing Feyre, as we've seen Tamlin do time and again. When Feyre has the most to contribute, she is put in a place where she is powerless and made to believe she has nothing to contribute. This is only going to exacerbate the tension already building between Tamlin and Feyre, and not the sexy kind.
It's such a shame, because I do love the sexy kind.
I'm sorry.
Yeah. It'll come later. It's okay. Feyre asks to train, and yet she doesn't want to be a spy. You can't pick and choose your roles in a war. But this is not showing Feyre's hypocrisy. What it's showing is that her allegiance to Tamlin is already gone.
Yes.
Bye-bye.
Such a good point. So as we enter Chapter 8, we begin to see a rapid decline in Feyre and Tamlin's relationship that is reflected in the time Tamlin gives to Feyre, as well as the way their sexual encounters shift from lovemaking to mere thrusting.
Why am I oddly okay with that?
Because you... Are you okay?
I'm not okay. I'm not okay, Amy. Oh, God. Okay, continue.
To start, Feyre gets one day with Tamlin upon her return to the Spring Court before he is gone again after she's been gone for a week.
A week, just like Rhysand was gone for a week for her first trip to the Night Court. Oh my, look at that. Mirroring.
But also, is Tamlin punishing her?
I think that's pretty fair.
If that weren't enough, Feyre is then separated from Tamlin for another week of his own choosing for an unknown reason. This brings into question his frenzy when Feyre is gone. It's not so much that Feyre is gone as it is that Rhysand is the one to have her. From a Marxist perspective, Feyre is an object or possession that implies control or power. Both Tamlin and Rhys are easily angered when the other has Feyre in their possession. We saw Tamlin use Feyre as an item of power at the end of Thorns and Roses when he took her to all those meetings, which, by the way, he hasn't done since. So it's not beyond Tamlin. And we know Rhysand is capable of using Feyre to piss off Tamlin, given that that was half the reason he created the bargain to begin with. When Tamlin only comes back to the manor the night before the tithe, Feyre remarks that, quote, I tried to not take it personally, not when he had so much on his shoulders, even if he wouldn't tell me much about it beyond what Ianthe had mentioned. Feyre, first off, is not being honest with herself, but also it's weird that both Tamlin and Ianthe refuse to give Feyre information. This is telling me that it's not about her gender here, but about Feyre being remade, not truly Fae. And so by doing so, Tamlin and Ianthe are perpetuating the fact that the Fae think they know better or that they know what's best for Feyre. Although Feyre thinks it's a relief to not speak or act at the tithe, she's already brought her ability to be honest into question. She's just a trophy. She just needs to sit there and look pretty. As an object of power, she doesn't need to do anything else but be present.
The idea that they judge her on a, I don't know, more primal, I don't know, but like on a more deep-seated way, on the fact that she's not a real high fae. I love that you're making this point, because the first time I was reading your notes, I was like, huh, really? What you doing here? But as we're about to go into this whole tithe water wraith scene and we see how much they're judging these lower fae, you're right. It makes absolute sense that this court has a lot of bigotry in it.
Mm-hmm.
And it makes sense that this would be the court where they just don't want to tell her things.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, this is also making me jump. When you think about the summer court, didn't Feyre point out that all the fae were mixed there? High fae, lower fae.
Yeah.
And that's also a court where people did tell her things.
Interesting, yeah.
Right? Like, that's the court where Tarquin is willing to be more honest with her and talk to her, because the concept of her not being high fae and being made, not an OG fae, doesn't bother him.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting.
Good point.
I love this.
So as you mentioned, Jac, the tithe is the first time we truly see a lesser fae other than Alice described in detail. And this lesser fae is treated with mistrust. The tithe itself is also a ritual of a high fae lording over lesser fairies and requiring payment for protection and the privilege of his leadership.
The privilege.
This is setting up interesting power dynamics in Prythian that get touched upon later in the novel.
Everyone's disgusted by the wraith's appearance. Even Lucien disapproves of the lesser fae. When the water wraith comes up, she's not wearing any clothes and his face tightens with disapproval. Feyre is surrounded by bigotry here, even with her precious friend Lucien. God, come on, Lucien. When Lucien takes a step between her and the water wraith, Feyre's mad. Quote, I gritted my teeth. Who did they think would attack us in our own homes, on our own lands, if they weren't concerned about Hybern? If they weren't concerned, Hybern might be launching an assault. Even Ianthe had paused her quiet murmurings in the back of the hall to monitor the encounter. This is profiling. The water wraith has done nothing wrong, and she just walks in, right? Yeah. Proud of her body.
Yeah.
Doesn't have to put on clothes.
No. She didn't hiss at anybody.
She didn't hiss. She didn't glare.
No.
She wasn't she was just coming in ready to beg.
Yeah.
And they're coming in and be like, no, don't like you, go away.
Yep. That is profiling at its finest.
Yep. Everyone, including Lucien. Sorry, Lucien lovers. Emily in particular. She asked not to destroy him, but shout out to Emily.
Before we jump into discussing what actually happens during the tithe, let's talk about the setup of it and how it impacts Feyre's state of mind, because I think her actions are predicated on what the tithe represents to her. Quote, the receiving room, Lucien had called it, but it felt a hell of a lot like a throne room to me. I wondered if he called it that because the other words, I'd spent too much time in another throne room. So had Tamlin. So straight off the bat, this sets the tone of the room and the interactions during the tithe from Feyre's perspective. This setting reminds Feyre of Amarantha and Amarantha's court under the mountain. This is something she spends all her waking hours avoiding and in the evening has nightmares about. Feyre is trapped here as a possession of power for Tamlin to display and is powerless to do anything except fidget and eventually go deaf to the interactions in order to tune out the trauma she is reliving.
Do you think the throne room looks like that because of Ianthe going in there and saying, like, hey, this is how you should decorate it, because that's the kind of thing she would do? But we should also remember that Tamlin's dad and Amarantha were friends, so they could have easily built similar throne rooms. I think there's a fair point to say that it probably looks a lot like Under the Mountain.
Yeah, I think, based on a quote you're going to say in a little bit, I think this has always been a throne room.
I think it's always been a throne room, but because Tamlin's dad and Amarantha were buddy-buddy, I can see Amarantha being like, the Under the Mountain should look
like this.
Like she picked and choose. She picked some parts to look like the Night Court. I'm sure this one was probably similar to.
I can see that.
Yeah. In this scene, we also have Tamlin wearing a crown. Quote, "The crown atop his head gleamed in the afternoon light, crafted with emeralds, sapphires, and amethysts. The gold had been molded into the wreath of spring's first flowers, one of the 5 crowns belonging to the bloodline." 2 things here. Okay, the first one is Rhys is very much the opposite here. While Tamlin wears crowns and Feyre does not, Rhys keeps putting Feyre in crowns while he does not wear a crown.
Or when Rhys does wear a crown, he makes sure Feyre is also wearing a crown.
Yeah, Feyre is always wearing a crown.
Always.
There are times when she's wearing a crown and he's not.
That happens.
But she's always in a crown.
She is. Because she's
You
a
should
queen.
see me in a crown.
You should see me in a crown.
Here's point number 2. Tamlin has 5 crowns belonging to his bloodline. You know what also was 5? The 5 glass doors smashed earlier in the book by Feyre. Feyre literally smashes the spring court and destroys it in the next book.
I'm sorry. I just love that you brought that back.
Thank you. I didn't think of it until you pointed out that she smashed 5 doors. I'm like, that's such a specific number.
It is a very specific number.
And I think that this was definitely done with some intention here.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Because when SJM brings in specific numbers, it's usually 7.
Yeah, that's why I was like 5.
Why 5?
Why?
Fall has officially started here in Los Angeles, and that means we finally get to do fall activities.
I have been counting down the days for when I can go to pumpkin patches, maybe even hit up an apple orchard, and I get to do all of it looking super cute in my Quince boyfriend sweater.
This weather is perfect for my dark academia vibes, and I'm so excited to bust out my washable silk blouse because you know I'm going to be taking pictures.
Quince is known for their Mongolian cashmere sweaters from $50. And that's not all. Quince has so many other amazing things on their website.
All of those items are priced 50 to 80% less than similar brands.
That includes leather jackets, cotton cardigans, soft denim. Like, my entire fall wardrobe is genuinely turning into Quince wardrobe.
By partnering directly with top factories and cutting out the cost of the middleman, we get savings as the customer.
One of my favorite parts about Quince is the fact that they only work with factories that use safe, ethical, and responsible manufacturing practices. And they still manage to get premium fabrics and finishes for that, luxury feeling for every item that they have.
Get cozy in Quince's high-quality wardrobe essentials. Go to quince.com/booktalk for free shipping on your order and 365-day returns. That's Quince, QUINCE.com/booktalk, BOOKTALK, to get free shipping and 365-day returns. That's quince.com/booktalk.
Move your career further, faster in just 2 days with a Harvard Professional and Executive Development Program. Advance your leadership skills, craft smarter business strategies, build your network, and transform how you work and think to keep your career moving forward. You'll earn a certificate and can add Harvard to your resume with Harvard Professional and Executive Development. Learn more at professional.dce.harvard.edu/Spotify.
Hey, I'm Ryan Reynolds. At Mint Mobile, we like to do the opposite of what Big Wireless does. They charge you a lot, we charge you a little. So naturally, when they announced they'd be raising their prices due to inflation, we decided to deflate our prices due to not hating you. That's right. We're cutting the price of Mint Unlimited from $30 a month to just $15 a month.
Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
$45 upfront payment equivalent to $15 per month. New customers on first 3-month plan only. Taxes and fees extra. Speed slower above 40 gigabytes. See details.
During this tithe scene, we also see the Fae who visit Tamlin weep at the sight of Feyre, thank her for what she did under the mountain. And just like when she was remade, this makes Feyre extremely uncomfortable. She has a very strong dislike of being thanked for killing innocents. But I have a question here. Do we think there were any High Fae who thank Feyre, or is it just the lesser fairies?
I think this is such a great point because I don't know. I'm trying to think about it. So does Tarquin thank her? I think so, sort of. No one thanks her. They just kind of compliment her.
People thanked her immediately after she was remade, and we know that it was only High Fae there. Mm-hmm. But I don't see them saying any more thank yous after that initial thank you.
No, it's like, you had my one thank you. That's enough.
Yeah, exactly.
We're good. We're even now.
Yeah, exactly.
You saved me, brought back my power. I said thank you one time and, walked away.
I'm pretty confident it's only lesser fairies.
I think you should be confident because I think you're right. You should always be confident, Amy.
Thank you. Because I'm always right.
Because you're always right.
We then have the interaction between the Water Wraith, Tamlin, and Feyre. This is a pivotal moment in the novel for multiple reasons. First, as we know, is that this is setting up for events in the Summer Court when Feyre and Amren go to retrieve the Book of Breathings. On the other hand, however, it is an important stepping stone for Feyre to recall her humanity. What do I mean by this? When the Water Wraith tries to defend herself and her sisters for having nothing for the tithe, Tamlin tells the Wraith, quote, "Do not interrupt me," he said. Feyre looked away, unable to stomach that merciless face. In this moment, Tamlin reminds Feyre of Amarantha, just as the receiving room reminds Feyre of Amarantha's court. This instantly sets up Feyre to resist, just as she resisted Amarantha, because despite her current willingness to be complacent, there are some fundamental things about Feyre that have not and will not change, and that is survival. If the present Tamlin is Amarantha, then the present Feyre is Tamlin, and her subconscious is unwilling to be silent like Tamlin was at Amarantha's side under the mountain while human Feyre was destroyed.
Yes to all of this. This also makes Feyre resent Tamlin on a whole other level. If she's in the same place as Tamlin, then she knows that Tamlin could have done something to help her, just like Feyre helped the Water Wraith.
Tamlin just does not want to accept any recommendations Feyre has for anything because he refuses to acknowledge Feyre's request that they help the Wraith replenish the pond with fish rather than punish her and her sisters. When Tamlin ignores her pleas, Feyre thinks, quote, "I'd spent enough years with an aching belly to not be able to drop it, to want to scream at the unfairness of it." Feyre identifies with the Water Wraith here. What we realize, and subconsciously what Feyre realizes, is that up until this point, her compassion has been kind of misplaced. It is by seeing herself in the Water Wraith that brings Feyre back to herself before her death under the mountain. When the Water Wraith leaves the manor, Feyre chases after her. Despite being afraid of the Wraith, believing the Wraith may try to eat her because Feyre's weak and even as High Fae she's prey, Feyre offers the Wraith her jewelry to help buy food. What's fascinating here is that the Water Wraith doesn't treat Feyre like other lesser fairies have until this point. As Feyre approaches, the Water Wraith does not give, quote, "a full bow, because I was no one, but recognition that I was the High Lord's plaything." I love this because even Feyre doesn't take herself seriously. This explains why she hates the recognitions other fairies give her.
I'm just the High Lord's plaything. Like, you're his fiance. I've never heard of any woman describe themselves as like, I'm just his plaything. I think you're about to be his wife.
Yeah.
I would say you've upgraded from plaything.
Yeah.
God, Feyre. It's also showing Feyre's self-hatred, hating the things that she had to do to get that recognition. We can also note that the jewelry that Feyre gave was a ruby-studded gold bracelet. Rubies are red. Not only was this an inconsiderate gift from Tamlin, this is something that Ianthe had told Feyre was better suited for her coloring. Ianthe again forcing Feyre to wear blood red.
I did not notice this, and I freaking love it because it is such a good point.
It's a sneaky moment.
It is a very sneaky moment, and I am so glad you pointed it out.
Because by Feyre giving away this piece of jewelry, she's starting to give away her pain. Just like when she was with Rhysand and she started to see red, red is now slowly losing its meaning.
After giving the water wraith the jewelry, the wraith bows deeply because of Feyre's kindness, not her position, not because she's a plaything. Feyre wants to make meaningful contributions here. We saw this when she offered to help hunt for the villagers in Chapter 2. Feyre wants to make a difference using the means or skills that she has instead of being a trophy. Defying Tamlin to do that now for the Water Wraith is an important step in reminding Feyre who she is and what power she has when she's separated from Tamlin.
We also saw this in Book 1 when she goes to the poorer part of the human village and gives them money. Both times she's giving away Tamlin's money, or in this case, Tamlin's jewels. But this time he resents her for it because it's the lesser Fae. Okay, sure, he might not have known that she gave away his money the first time around in Thorns and Roses, but I feel like he would have approved giving money to humans rather than lesser Fae.
I don't know if I agree, since part of the curse was you have to go make a human fall in love with you because you resent them so much.
Yeah, but he always thought he was better than his dad.
Oh, fair.
You know,
fair,
so
fair.
It's one of those like, I'm so above it. You can give them money. Screw you, lesser Fae.
Feyre's attitude towards jewelry is an important marker in her development throughout this novel. We see how she treats or views jewelry for the first time when she and Tamlin fight about what happened during the tithe. Feyre tells Tamlin, quote, "Those things don't mean anything to me. I've never worn the same piece of jewelry twice. Who cares about any of it?"
She's never worn the same piece of jewelry twice. I'm really concerned that I'm like suited to be Tamlin's mate right now.
You would really thrive.
I really would. And I hate this about myself. Like just, oh, you want me to dress up, wear pretty dresses, just hang out?
You want to give me a new piece of jewelry every day?
You want to like be super animalistic for other things? Like,
yeah,
shit,
baby.
Shit.
Feyre in this moment is reminding us that wealth is not important to her, but helping others is. This is a stark contrast to Tamlin, the man she supposedly loves and thinks she may marry. In the next chapter, we see her dread the apology gift from Tamlin, hoping it's not a crown or diadem. But if we think back to the point you made, Jac, it would never be a crown or a diadem because he would never give her those things because he's going to wear them.
It's funny how Feyre worries that it's that, though.
It is.
You know, like that's such a specific moment of, but what if it's a crown? What were there signs that it was going to be a crown?
He's never given you one before.
Never given you a crown.
It's also interesting that the jewelry pieces are ones Ianthe chose for Feyre, since Feyre would have chosen silver. That's what she says. Is this then also a rejection of not only Tamlin's gifts, but Ianthe and Ianthe's role in how she controls Feyre? Feyre's reaction here is a stark difference between other gifts of jewelry she will receive later in the novel. At this time, though, Feyre abhors these items because they are superficial and useless. I personally think this is a reflection of her self-hatred. Feyre, like the jewelry right now, is superficial and useless, and all she wants is to be useful.
Can I be useful but also have useless jewelry?
You can do anything you want, Jac.
Thank you for believing in me. When Tamlin explains to Feyre why they couldn't help the Water Wraith, he says, "Because that's the way it is. That's the way my father did it, and his father, and the way my son shall do it too." He offered a smile and reached for my hand. Someday. I know, right? First off, ew. That's my note. It's just ew. This whole thing creeps me out. He's also assuming that he's going to have a son instead of a daughter, which is automatically like unacceptable.
You would be privileged to have a daughter, Tamlin.
Right? I constantly be like, my firstborn daughter.
Yes.
Like she's gonna be a girl. But there's also a sense of ownership from Tamlin on this hypothetical child, as if Feyre would have no say in how it's raised. Plus, the idea of her getting pregnant, it's tying her down. Tamlin would be invading her. It's something from him that's dominating her body. It's so gross. Something like pregnancy really freaks me out.
No. I mean, it's interesting because she's never thought about children.
No. And he's impregnating her already.
Yeah.
Rather than this being something they grow together, it just feels like a seed of him that overtakes her and just makes her more rooted to the situation there.
Right. It's a requirement of being his bride.
Yeah. Also, there's nothing wrong with having a daughter.
Also, there's nothing wrong with having children, but it has to be a mutually agreed upon thing, right?
Oh, yeah. I mean,
I think so.
Ideally, I think that's pretty universal. It should be mutually agreed upon, yeah. Feyre thinks, someday, if we ever married, if I ever became less of a burden and we both escaped the shadows haunting us. Feyre views herself as a burden and only thinks about their trauma when the idea of a child comes up.
That's a great point.
Mm-hmm.
An important aspect of the tithe is to set up Tamlin to be Rhysand's opposite. At one point, after the interaction with the water wraith, Tamlin tells Feyre, as you said, quote, because this is the way that it is for the tithe. This quote shapes Feyre's understanding of the courts and how High Lords operate. She assumes this applies to all courts and High Lords later on. However, we will see that this is the opposite of how Rhysand operates, and Tarquin as well, both of whom dream of better ways of living for everyone, for equality.
The way that Tamlin acts with the whole tithe, with everything afterwards, don't interrupt me and all of that, it oddly mirrors Rhysand when Rhysand's in the Night Court.
You're right. And Feyre kind of finds it hot.
So do I. No, actually, Feyre doesn't find it. Look, tithe Tamlin, not hot. Night Court Rhysand, very hot. And Feyre does not appreciate it as much as she should.
I agree.
Like the fact that, we'll get to it later, but the fact that they both walk away for a bit, Feyre and Rhysand, like they felt dirty. I'm like, feel great.
I enjoyed it.
I'm feeling refreshed. I don't know what's going on.
The dining room scene is an intersection of ignorance as power and food as power. With her heightened emotions during her argument with Tamlin, Feyre demonstrates two different types of powers that become key to her journey in Mist and Fury. One being the power of the Damati, or mind powers, when she invades Lucian's thoughts, and fire when she burns the table with her hands.
Feyre only invades Lucian's mind because he has a weaker mind. So weak that he can't even speak up for himself. I'm just coming in hot here for Lucian.
You really are, but it's a really fantastic point.
He's a weak one.
I actually found it really interesting that it's described as old and having a, wise way of thinking.
I think she said clever.
Clever, yeah. It makes me want to get to know Lucian more, but he is weak.
I somehow managed to still not want to get to know him. Crazy.
Crazy. We are beginning to see how Feyre's emotions trigger her powers. This sets up her choice then to avoid emotion by shutting down in the upcoming chapters and by choosing to sleep more and more. Feyre does this because she's been told she can't use her powers, that it's unsafe, and so she chooses to comply with those beliefs. However, at the same time, Feyre demonstrates an unwillingness to submit to Tamlin, just as she did during the tithe. Quote, "We're not finished with this meal," Tamlin growled. "Oh, get over yourself," I barked, and left.
It's my favorite.
It's one of my favorite moments.
From Feyre. Like, that just feels like the most natural, like, screw you.
It's also a complete opposite of Thorns and Roses, when Tamlin would dictate when she was done eating and when she could leave the meal, which I think shows a lot of growth and a moment of Feyre trying to take back power.
This quote from her here, this energy, this fiery Feyre, we have not seen that since the Feyre first arrived in the Spring Court. And she was sassing Tamlin left and right. Like, she was like, yeah, I'm going to run away from you, stab you, I don't care. Like, she just was, like, definitely not afraid to speak her mind towards him. And then everything happened, and now here's finally that human, fiery Feyre back.
So what we're seeing, as you say, Tamlin's losing his grip on Feyre. Though she complies by continuing to ignore her powers as a means of control over herself and allowing Tamlin to control her by extension, and though she refuses to eat, which is also a form of Feyre relinquishing control, Feyre is rebelling against Tamlin's wishes here. Interesting, then, that she's willing to eat food with Rhysand when he asks her to in the coming chapters. What does this mean? I think Feyre is seeing Tamlin as less of an authority and a less trustworthy figure in her life. He will soon be replaced with Rhysand, just as we saw in the second trial in Thorns and Roses. Feyre's desire to ignore her powers and remain in ignorance as a way to protect herself from Tamlin's wrath continues into the start of chapter 9. Quote, "Maybe I'd been mistaken when I'd spotted those burns. Maybe they'd been there before. Maybe I hadn't somehow summoned heat and branded the wood. Maybe I hadn't slipped into Lucian's mind as if I were moving from one room to another." How can we ever take Feyre seriously if she's always lying?
No, you can't. You can't take her seriously. It's like anytime she says, I could have sworn, or maybe, like, yes, then it definitely happened. Then that is 100% what happened. I'm pretty sure I would know if I burned a table with my hands. You don't mistakenly burn a table. And she's in denial just with everything else in her life. When Alice explains to Feyre why the water wraiths have a bad reputation, Alice says insatiable appetites. It's their curse. Feyre saw herself in these water wraiths, and if their curse is for an insatiable appetite, that's also how Feyre might potentially see herself too. But her appetite is the appetite to heal, to regain power, and she doesn't know what to do with that.
Ooh.
Also, it's funny that she compares herself to a creature that can't stop eating, and she just can't start eating.
Sad but true.
Yeah.
Tamlin tries to take control of the narrative of his relationship with Feyre and maintain control by avoiding Feyre after this fight, just like he likes to avoid the truth. Tamlin uses his work as an excuse to not see her until after Feyre is asleep, implying Tamlin has more importance as a High Lord and more use than Feyre does. When Feyre interrupts Tamlin, he uses skin-to-skin contact as his preferred communication method. This is the only way Feyre and Tamlin have ever really communicated. We saw this in Thorns and Roses. They avoid communication by using physicality.
Tamlin's love language is physical.
Touch?
Physical touch. That's his love language in communication.
Yeah.
It's also one of my many love languages. My love language is every single one of them.
So, mate.
I don't want to be his mate. I just feel like we could have thrived. I don't like Tamlin. I don't know what's happening to me.
Here's the thing about this, though. Feyre cannot reject Tamlin's apology without also rejecting his physical affection. To do so would be a rejection of Tamlin altogether, which we know has dire consequences because of his anger problems. It's a lose-lose situation for Feyre, regardless of whether she was capable of being honest about her feelings. Feyre notices the gift Tamlin has purchased as part of his apology as if, first off, her forgiveness is easily bought. This is where she hopes it's not a crown or a diadem.
My forgiveness is easily bought. It really is. Oh. Feyre never has this reaction when Rhysand gives her a crown to wear. That's because when a crown is from Tamlin, it's like a mask of being his consort, and a mask that everything in their court is A-okay. And we know what masks mean to Tamlin. It's a collar, like the one he wore with Amarantha. So by Tamlin giving Feyre a crown, it's really a collar.
I almost punched my own leg because such a good point.
You can't punch your leg. You're in a boot.
I can't. Question. Does Tamlin get Feyre paint because he's ignorant, or is he trying to force her healing? He's never around and she's bad at communicating, so it's kind of hard to tell. Remember, in Thorns and Roses, we talked about safe Feyre painting, the Feyre who was learning to thrive. Tamlin is trying to force Feyre to feel safe and force her to thrive again under his watchful eye. But that Feyre died under the mountain. The illusion of safety and thriving died with her. We are reminded of this when she reacts to the paint. Red. The red paint inside the glass vial was so bright. The blue is stunning as the eyes of that fairy woman I'd slaughtered. Looking at that box, at what was inside, felt like examining a crow-picked corpse.
Great question. Is Tamlin forcing Feyre to heal, or is this his way of encouraging her? My money is that Ianthe suggested the gift. I feel like that would be very on brand for her. I think that she was the one who told Tamlin to get it.
Never thought of that. Of like Ianthe having a role in this, but you're so right.
Yeah. But I can also see Tamlin as trying, like him not quite getting the point right. We always say that Tamlin falls short. So this would make sense where it's like, you didn't read the room of PTSD. This is Tamlin trying, but this is also Feyre letting Tamlin fall short by not expressing why the ideas of paint hurts her so much.
I agree. The most tragic part of this interaction is that when Feyre does communicate her needs to Tamlin, he gets mad at her and blasts the paints apart. So I wonder why she's never talked about it before. I believe this particular moment signals the destruction of the illusion of Tamlin and Feyre's relationship. I thought a lot about why Tamlin got mad in this moment and why he reacts the way he does. And this is what I came up with. Rhysand's mother and sister were killed by Tamlin's family with Tamlin in tow. They were beheaded and their heads were sent down a river in boxes. Does Feyre's use of drowning remind Tamlin of this guilt that he feels about Rhysand's family? Or is he just being dramatic and anything she said would have set him off?
I don't know. I think your first point was great, and I choose to believe that one because it's, yeah, drowning. That would be, I always felt like drowning was the word that did it for him.
I think so too. And I spent a lot of time thinking about that. Like, there was no drowning under the mountain.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody in his family drowned.
But the fact that they sent the heads in boxes in the river, graphic, but I can also see how that would be traumatizing for him as well, of seeing that, of like, holy crap, this is bad. That's also a note that this is when Tamlin starts to get physical with her. And we're now turning this into a domestic violence situation. Also note, this is when my attraction to Tamlin stops. Didn't even know I had one until this episode. But I draw the line here.
I blame the Draco Hermione fanfic.
It kind of is. I would say I need to slow down, but it won't stop, can't stop, never stop. As we enter chapter 10, we need to give a trigger warning. We will be discussing domestic violence.
So as we begin chapter 10, the study goes from being intact to being in shards, a shell of what it once was. This is exactly what Feyre is. She is fractured and a shell of what she once was. This is what love for Tamlin has done to her, and this is what Tamlin has done to their relationship. At first, Feyre gives Tamlin credit for being her shield, because she always gives him credit, always attributes any good or right that comes from their relationship to him. This is the first time, though, that she really truly recognizes her power for what it is. What this is showing Feyre is that she will protect herself before Tamlin. And if she isn't protecting herself, then Tamlin will not protect her, not in the way she needs protection, because it's not the way he thinks she needs.
This is also the first time Tamlin is seeing and recognizing Feyre's strength, too. It's out in the open. Neither of them can ignore it now.
Yep, can't ignore it for sure, because she won't let him in. So why does Feyre let the wall between her and Tamlin fall if she needs to protect herself?
Well, Tamlin starts to panic. Quote, Tamlin was panting, the ragged breaths almost like sobs. Tamlin pleads to Feyre, repeating her name over and over until she lets the wall down. This is how domestic violence starts, a reaction and then immediate apology. Quote, I'll try, he breathed. I'll try to be better. I can't control it sometimes, the rage. Today was bad, but with the tide, with all of it, today, let's forget about it. Let's just move past it, please. This is the most disgusting thing he said. It's just the most textbook for me.
Yeah. He's very liberal with his pleases, and I agree. It's very textbook, and it gives me the heebie-jeebies.
Yeah, because when we're saying textbook domestic violence. Like, right. He is every warning sign you hear about, like, it's not like they go in swinging. It builds up. And then the first time it happens, and it's an immediate, like, oh, no, that didn't happen. I'm so sorry. It's okay. It won't happen again.
Yeah, let's forget it.
Yeah.
Feyre, on some level, knows she does not truly have the ability to control her power, so the second best thing in this moment that she can do is to let the wall down and react to Tamlin's desire to comfort himself with physical touch. Feyre's reaction to Tamlin's physical touch is purely out of a need to protect herself rather than actual reciprocity. How do we know this? Instead of really being into the fact that his arms are around her, Feyre has her eyes open and watches the red paint on the wall sliding down like blood. The blood she sees signals that she doesn't feel safe in Tamlin's arms, and that his desire to comfort himself and not Feyre does not change her view of that paint. If she was comfortable, I don't think she would see blood.
No, she'd see like happy ponies sliding down the wall.
Or, more importantly, her eyes would be closed.
Yeah, that too. That's another option, and not seeing happy ponies.
But happy ponies.
That's another option.
This is where we begin to see the change in Feyre and Tamlin's lovemaking in earnest. Where they made love to each other at the start of chapter 9, after Feyre's return from the night court, Tamlin now makes love to her on page 103. Or, if you don't have the same copy as me, somewhere in the middle of chapter 10. One page later, it's just a morning roll in the sheets.
When we were going over our notes, I asked you to clarify that a little bit, because he makes love to her.
Exactly.
She's not an active participant. They're not making love together. The quote is, he made love to me.
Exactly. So in chapter 9, it's, quote, we made love in the grass.
Mm-hmm.
And in chapter 10, it's, quote, Tamlin made love to me. And then after our morning roll in the sheets.
It becomes more and more detached.
Exactly.
This is also another classic move for domestic violence. Tamlin is using sex as a power, and this is a power move in order to keep her around while she's hurting, but also trying to make it better. He's so gross.
He's a very tragic character. He doesn't know what the fuck he's doing, but it doesn't make it okay.
Everything till now was like not great.
This is bad.
It's bad. Like it's like, oh, okay, it's not great. He's being overly protective, sure. But now it's just like, we've crossed that line.
Yep.
You've gone too far.
Yep.
You need Faye anger management. I don't know where you can get that. Maybe his insurance can cover it. I don't know how great the insurance is at the spring court. I don't think it's universal care.
Probably not. They probably don't even have therapists in the spring court.
In the spring court, we just chop wood. I don't know. I don't know where any of this is coming from.
So I kind of gave you a description of all the different ways that they have sex, but what we're going to see after Feyre's second return from the night court in chapter 11 is the quote, protect, protect, protect. I could see the word in Tamlin's eyes, feel it in every thrust he made into my body. I mean, at this point, protect might as well have been mine. Mine, mine, mine. So what this is showing us is that they no longer make love together. In actuality, there's really no more love at all. Feyre has begun to remove her emotions, as you said, Jac, from the sexual encounters. A clear sign that she has begun to see sex with Tamlin as a survival mechanism and less about maintaining the relationship. Tamlin has resorted to using sex as a means of claiming Feyre, making sure he maintains ownership over her.
Sex has now been violated and tainted for the two of them. Sex is now Tamlin's way of apologizing for his inexcusable actions. What was once their safe space is now gone, and now there's nothing holding the two of them together.
Such a good point. Like, I always was very critical of them using sex to communicate with one another, but you're right, it was also a safe space for them.
And it was the only way they could communicate. Like, he brought their trauma and their fight to the bedroom.
Yeah.
And that was the one place where they were on the same level.
Yeah, on the same page.
But he ruined that for them. When Feyre reflects on Tamlin, she starts to really see his nature. Quote, a protector, that's who he was and would always be. That's what I had wanted when I was cold and hard and joyless. What I had needed to melt the ice of bitter years on the cusp of starvation. I didn't have the nerve to wonder what I needed now, who I had to become. This is probably the moment when Feyre should have called things off with Tamlin. And look, I'm going to give Feyre totally the benefit of the doubt here. I'm not going to tell her to go break it off with Tamlin, because if that was Tamlin's reaction when Feyre told him that she was drowning, I can't imagine how Tamlin would react if Feyre broke up with him. Additionally, we're really seeing just how much of a domestic violence situation this is. Feyre is afraid of him. She has no money and she has nowhere to go. If she had those things, do we think that she would feel more empowered to break up with him?
I don't know. I don't think so.
I think if she had if she knew she had a place to go, she had money, if she had a sense of independence.
Okay, sure.
Knowing he would still react poorly. I mean, poorly being abusive. She probably wouldn't. I don't know. But I'd like to hope. I just imagine that it's a lot harder knowing you don't have those things.
Mm-hmm. We get to a point where we're moments before Rhysand's second visit to claim Feyre, and Feyre realizes Tamlin is around less and less often. In theory, and what we learn later, is that this is so that he can find a means for breaking Feyre's bargain with Rhys, so that she can be 100% Tamlin's possession. By doing so, however, Tamlin is away more often than not. Feyre shows her complacency again by choosing to, quote, stop pestering him for answers. This is reminiscent of her choice in Thorns and Roses to stop offering to help Tamlin when he refused her at every turn. What it's also doing is driving a wedge between them. It is giving Feyre space to choose ignorance as a form of reclaiming her power, and by choosing this, she's cutting everything and everyone off by sleeping, rising later every day, in order to avoid her emotions, her powers, and her anger at Tamlin. At the same time, Feyre is working on her reading and her shielding because she has nothing better to do. But it is also another means of her reclaiming her power from Tamlin, since neither he nor Lucien are there to stop her.
When Feyre leaves with Rhysand, she looks at Tamlin. Quote, so I memorized the lines of Tamlin's face and didn't fight him when he pulled me into his chest and held me tightly. This is the moment. This is when Feyre has let go of him in her mind. She memorized the lines on his face. That's what you do when you're about to have a permanent goodbye.
I gave this comment a 5-star rating on
thank you.
on my paper.
A 5?
A 5-star.
What's my average?
I
If you
don't
say 4.9.
It's more than 4.9. Hey, if you guys haven't rated us yet,
please, someone accidentally rated us below a 5.
and we would really appreciate all the stars we can get.
The 5 stars.
I'm an overachiever. I'm sorry. Feyre arrives at the Night Court for her second visit at the start of Chapter 11. Rhys tries to take control of Feyre's situation by feeding her, using food as a means of claiming power over her, but she's in charge enough to use food to ignore him and his questions.
This is where the lines get a little blurred. Is Rhysand using food as a means of claiming power over Feyre, or is he feeding her starving need for power? She's so starved for attention and a sense of control that while he's insistent, he's also telling her that she has power here.
Ultimately, Feyre is trying to exert herself to show that she is not beholden to anyone but herself. Another way to read this, as I've discussed before, is that Feyre feels safe enough at the Night Court to eat, to claim her power, where she has not felt that way at the Spring Court. She is not afraid of Rhysand losing his temper, though he certainly has one. What I think this is showing is that Rhysand, though maybe as quick to anger as Tamlin, has more ability to keep his temper contained, where Tamlin is a loose cannon. This would explain Feyre's ability to feel safe enough to eat despite their similarities. Or, quite frankly, she just doesn't care what Rhys thinks. Ultimately, Feyre doesn't give in to Rhysand because, for some reason, she still holds out hope for Tamlin, for the love that they once had, I think. Tamlin's half-hearted attempts to relinquish some control over her is giving her some sort of false hope. It's pretty abusive, however you slice it, and the fact that she's willing to let it continue hurts even more.
Just like we saw the shift in the previous chapter with the end of her relationship with Tamlin, we're seeing the start of Feyre's relationship with Rhys. And this chapter is throwing out emotional intimacy left and right. So, emotional intimacy warning.
Because we have not had enough of that yet.
Not at all. Rhys is finally understanding that he dug that grave himself with his actions under the mountain. Unlike her previous visit, Rhys is understanding and not as angry about it, which means he's reflected on it and he's grown.
Chef's kiss.
Chef's kiss. This is a huge moment here. Rhys says, I was a prisoner in her court for nearly 50 years. I was tortured and beaten and fucked until only telling myself who I was, what I had to protect, kept me from trying to find a way to end it. Please, help me keep that from happening again to Prythian. Some distant part of my heart ached and bled at the words, at what he'd laid bare. This is a huge moment because Feyre hasn't received this type of honesty from, literally anyone ever.
Never.
Ever in her life,
Never.
I would say. And it resonates with her, and she starts to soak in his words as she goes back to eating. Rhys once again leaves for business for the week, just like Tamlin had, but when he's back and he finds Feyre just, reading on the side, he shames her for being hell-bent on a sedentary lifestyle, which is, like I said, she's just reading a book and admiring the view, and I personally feel attacked by this.
That's all I want for myself. I would like to be a kept woman, please.
We got to go back to the Spring Court in a pre-abusive world.
Yeah, before the abuse, please.
But then Rhys uses food as a way to plead for help on how to help her. Rhys and Feyre are lost, and both are using food to cope. For Feyre, it's by not eating, and for Rhys, it's by trying to tempt her to heal with food. Rhys asks Feyre what to do to help, a question that Feyre can't even process because no one has asked her that. Quote, she wins, Rhys breathed. That bitch wins if you let yourself fall apart. I wonder if he's been telling himself that for months now. Wondered if he, too, had moments when his own memory sometimes suffocated him deep in the night.
She's projecting onto him.
I know, but this, okay. So she's totally projecting onto him.
But it's true.
Yeah, so that's the story of both of their life, right? Is that Rhys happens to be right.
Yeah.
And Feyre just happens to be right.
Yeah. Yeah. In this moment, she happens to be right.
Yeah, that's why they work together, is that they both happen to be right with each other. This is a connection that she never had with Tamlin because he never gave it to her. Quote, and I realized I was in a free fall with no end. I had been for a while. From the moment I stabbed that Fey youth in the heart, I didn't look at him again as I devoured the food.
So the fighter in Feyre died when Amarantha killed her, but we already knew this. So what's interesting about this last interaction before Feyre returns to the Spring Court? Immortality is a free fall with no end, a yawning abyss, and she doesn't know what to do with it except to relive her trauma. Here we see free falling again. Notice how Feyre is still afraid of it. Why is this? So far, Feyre's limited exposure to immortality has shown her that others only intend to use her and prevent her from doing the things that are meaningful to her existence. Her human desires are gone, and with eternity in front of her, she has no use or purpose. And so, the free fall is a pointless drop into a bottomless pit of despair and emptiness. Everyone else seems to have a purpose, yet Feyre is told she doesn't need any. She did enough in her mere 19 years of mortality. And that, dear listener, is terrifying.
Let's keep in mind here that Rhys is 500 years old? I think Tamlin's 400 or something. Feyre is 19 years old. She is a child. Her brain has not finished developing, and now she's a Fae.
Yeah, and it's not like she aged 100 years when she was made into a Fae.
Yeah.
She just barely had her 20th birthday.
Everyone here is definitely treating her like she's an adult, and she's just like, hey, I legally can't drink.
It's true. It's true.
I've only been able to vote one time. She's a little girl. She's I know, we might have some 19-year-old listeners, but I love you guys. You're kids, just so young.
I remember what I was like at 19. And I remember being as hard on myself and hating myself as much as Feyre does now. Not because I killed anybody, but I did.
What?
Hate myself.
Oh, wait.
Hate myself.
But you did killers?
No, I did hate myself. But there's so much more life to be had. And we have to keep the perspective that she's not a child. We're not going to patronize her here. But she doesn't have enough experience to understand.
It's also really unfair to be a child, but also be treated like an adult by everyone around you. Mm-hmm. Everyone's expecting you to be on their level and is expecting you to just understand and get things. When, first off, Feyre never had a childhood. Mm-hmm. She never got to do any of that. Mm-hmm. And now she gets to breathe a little bit, mm-hmm. and she still doesn't get to. Instead, she's being thrusted to be a child bride, barely legal. And I'm sure the age of consent's a little more generous there, but generous? No, ew. I'm sure the age of consent in Prythian is, I'm going to say 18.
Well, I think it is, but they also don't, Moore didn't get her period till she was almost 18.
Yeah, that's a fair point.
And they don't consider high fae fully grown until they're 80.
Yeah, or wait, is it Moore who didn't get her period till she was 18?
Something like that.
No, it was also Rhys's mom who
I think it's both of them.
Oh, both?
Both.
Yeah, so there's a certain amount of, you're not reaching maturity until, let's say, consent age for them is when you start becoming a Fae. I don't know. There's that age of maturity when you stop aging.
Yeah.
Feyre is not there yet.
Let me do some math for you.
Mm-hmm,
Feyre's 20. Mm-hmm. Rhysand's at
19.
least... She's 20. She just had her birthday on the solstice.
All right, fine. We'll give it to her.
Rhysand's at least 500 years old. Uh-huh. That's 25 times her age.
I am all for a sexy age gap.
But there is some maturity differences here.
Double her life still does not equal the amount of time that Rhys was under the mountain.
Oh, you're right. You're right.
Right?
Right.
Rhys has been tortured longer than Feyre was alive.
Potentially longer than her father was alive.
Yeah. But at the same time, all these grown-ass males are telling her, hey, you got to get on board. Reflect on your feelings. Hey, 19, 20-year-old who killed someone, who killed two innocent people. How come you're so traumatized?
And I think we as readers also need to have a little bit of perspective as well.
Yeah, we're going to kind of go back to the power dynamics between Feyre and Rhys. And, I think there's great improvements that Rhys did here with her second visit. But now that they're not both prisoners under the mountain and they're outside of the mountain and we're seeing this power dynamic, he's still someone who's significantly older, more mature, experienced more life.
Yeah, he's made a lot more mistakes and had a lot more time to grow from them.
Yeah. Feyre's had, 3 months since underneath the mountain?
Something like that.
Yeah, it's very unfortunate.
So we have some breadcrumbs from these chapters, starting with chapter 7, Jacqueline.
Quote, he'd, who's the king of Highburn, have allies here? A slow nod. Cowards who would bow and join him rather than fight his armies again. That's Ianthe. And then Tamlin.
And then Tamlin eventually.
And then Tamlin, yeah.
Quote, you're close to Tamlin. He has men. but he also has long existing ties to Hybern. He'd never help the king. Oh, Feyre. But he will.
Oh, no. We're still in chapter 7. Quote, "What if you could stand against us? Hold your own. A high lady. Yes, Feyre, there can be high ladies. What if you were something similar? What if you were able to wield the power of 7 high lords at once? What if you could blend into darkness or shapeshift or freeze an entire room, an entire army?" This is pretty on the nose there, Rhys. Like,
yeah, it's very on the nose, and I think this is something Sarah J. Maas does with her foreshadowing. It's a little too on the nose sometimes.
yeah, it's a very much like a, so you're saying is that this is going to happen.
Exactly,
Okay.
exactly. Now that I read her books, I'm like, what conversations are taking place early on?
Mm-hmm.
It's probably what's going to happen later.
I would really love for one of her characters to tell me what my life might be, because then it would be.
Exactly. This is not on the paper, and this is a spoiler for other Sarah J. Maas novels, so skip ahead. But Rhysand says there can be other high ladies. Does this mean he knows of other high ladies because he's done research? And could this be tied to Feyre and Starborn
Feyre
from Hosab, the Starborn princess?
Oh, right. I was like, are you mispronouncing Feyre's name? Yeah, I see what you're saying. I also think, and again, like, you already gave the warning for spoilers.
I did.
But if you haven't listened to our episode with A Happy Hermit, go back and listen, because there is a great theory that Moore is actually a high lady of the Dust Court.
Yes, which I freaking love. And I think there are clues in this book for that.
Oh, yeah, I do too.
Still in chapter 7, quote, "Because there might be a day, Feyre, when only you stand between the king of Hybern and your human family, and you do not want to be unprepared." First off, this is especially sad when you think about the end of Mist and Fury, but again, very on the nose.
Yeah, it's... I was looking at this quote, and the idea of, like, you don't want to be unprepared, because she is. She ends up being extremely unprepared, and I think we're going to talk more... There's a lot that could have prepared her for that, and I think some of that were her choices.
Yep, I agree.
Now we're in chapter 8, Breadcrumbs. Quote, "I will not forget this kindness, nor will any of my sisters." Thank the cauldron for that.
Like my note there.
Yeah, that's a good note.
And a breadcrumb from chapter 11. Quote, "I will find a way to end this," he, Tamlin, swore. Ah, yes. Thanks, Tamlin. Thanks for going to Hybern for that.
Yeah. Really, really solved a problem.
So the question we asked at the beginning of this episode was, is this the end of Tamlin and Feyre's love story and the beginning of Rhysand and Feyre?
Yes, but let's get more into just the obvious answer of yes. What I really love about this moment here, when I originally read Mist and Fury, it did feel very like Feyre was a baton, right? Like one ended and the other picked up, and, you know, I don't want to say she hopped from one to the next, because I think Sarah J. Maas does the work to make it not look like that. But I think these chapters in particular show it, right? And this is where I'm going to get into that. So we definitely rip into Rhysand quite a bit in this episode, but, you know, we got to call it as we see it. I will applaud him for really reflecting on his actions from her first visit to the second visit. There are leaps and bounds with how he's adapted and learned and changed based off of Feyre's interaction with him. That is separate from Feyre's dynamic with Tamlin. Rhys is not reacting in a way because of her breakup, isn't reacting in a way because it's what he's seen from Tamlin. This is just him naturally. And that's naturally happening in tandem with Tamlin's slow demise.
I think you make a great point. And what just came to my mind in this moment is that Rhys makes a comment that he only got a glimpse of her through the bond in that moment of terror that she had when Tamlin blew up. And so, unlike the previous episode, he does not have access to information right now through the bond about her and what she's feeling or what Tamlin is doing, right?
Yep.
All he has are his thoughts and his past actions that he's sorting through. So I do think that we don't see all of it happening on the page. Rhysand is showing reflection and growth. Who else is acting? during these chapters, Feyre. Feyre has taken what Rhys told her to heart, and she's really starting to digest that she's not okay with her current circumstances. And so I agree. I don't think she chooses to end it with Tamlin to go to Rhys. I think there is a natural decay in her relationship with Tamlin, and Rhys is honestly her only quote-unquote friend.
Yeah, and to kind of harp back on it, it's not like Rhys has reflected on his actions because Feyre happens to be there, or because he's seeing what's going on with Tamlin. Like, that's truly a him doing that on his own situation.
Mm-hmm.
And Tamlin's failure is truly him happening on his own. Like,
Right.
For the moment things change between Feyre and Tamlin isn't when they're arguing about her staying with Rhysand.
Right.
Isn't about, hey, you don't grill me so much.
Mm-hmm.
The argument is happening when Feyre is saying, I need more space.
Right. And it's truly solely about their relationship.
Yeah. It's all of it is happening separate from one another.
Mm-hmm.
It's happening at the same time, but it's this is the shift that we can see, and it's done beautifully when you look into it.
Yeah. Sarah J. Maas, as we said, does the work. She's very good about doing the work. And at the end of the day, Feyre is her own woman,
Mm-hmm.
and she is treating these relationships as mutually exclusive.
Yeah. They are still completely exclusive at this point.
Yep. Thank you for listening to this week's episode of Book Talk for Book Talk. We encourage you to rate and subscribe to our show on your preferred podcast listening platform. Next week, we will be exploring chapters 12 through 15 in A Court of Mist and Fury.
We would love to hear your thoughts based on today's conversation. You can submit your comments to our forum at booktalkforbooktalk.com for a chance to have your feedback discussed during a weekly mini episode.
If you are enjoying the podcast, please visit our website, booktalkforbooktalk.com, to view our latest merch and learn about supporting the show through Patreon, Ko-Fi, or Venmo.
Or find us on TikTok and Instagram at the handle BookTalkForBookTalk. Bye!
Fall has officially started here in Los Angeles, and that means we finally get to do fall activities.
I have been counting down the days for when I can go to pumpkin patches, maybe even hit up an apple orchard, and I get to do all of it looking super cute in my Quince boyfriend sweater.
This weather is perfect for my dark academia vibes, and I'm so excited to bust out my washable silk blouse because you know I'm going to be taking pictures.
Quince is known for their Mongolian cashmere sweaters from $50. And that's not all. Quince has so many other amazing things on their website.
All of those items are priced 50 to 80% less than similar brands.
That includes leather jackets, cotton cardigans, soft denim. Like, my entire fall wardrobe is genuinely turning into Quince wardrobe.
By partnering directly with top factories and cutting out the cost of the middleman, we get savings as the customer.
One of my favorite parts about Quince is the fact that they only work with factories that use safe, ethical, and responsible manufacturing practices. And they still manage to get premium fabrics and finishes for that, luxury feeling for every item that they have.
Get cozy in Quince's high-quality wardrobe essentials. Go to quince.com/booktalk for free shipping on your order and 365-day returns. That's Quince, QUINCE.com/booktalk, BOOKTALK, to get free shipping and 365-day returns. That's quince.com/booktalk.
Hey, I'm Ryan Reynolds.
Recently, I asked Mint Mobile's legal team if big wireless companies are allowed to raise prices due to inflation. They said yes. And then when I asked if raising prices technically violates those onerous two-year contracts, they said, "What the f*** are you talking about, you insane Hollywood ass?" So to recap, we're cutting the price of Mint Unlimited from $30 a month to just $15 a month.
Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
$45 upfront payment equivalent to $15 per month. New customers on first 3-month plan only. Taxes and fees extra. Speed slower above 40 gigabytes. See details.